Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Soul Hygiene, my brave and beautiful humans. We are back, and I have two wonderful human beings with me today. I saw those eyes roll, Mr. Roger. But Mr. Roger and Mr. Dan, we had such a great meeting a couple weeks ago, and I just wanted to introduce them to my audience. They do have a podcast called Tracer Burnout, and their website is tracerburnout.com. And I really love their mission. I have it up next to my screen here, so I was just going to read a few snippets of it, but they help civilians better understand life in the service and assist veterans in connecting with old friends, preserve each veteran's service memories for future generations, and they help veterans feel heard and that their service matters. And I really appreciate that. They're really good guys. And so I'm just going to turn it over to them and just let them take as much time as they need. Just explain to everybody who they are and just introduce them to the world, my world anyway. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Roger and Mr. Dan. Thanks so
Perfect.
much for being here, guys.
Thanks, Dan. You want to go first?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for having us.
Of
It's
course.
great to be here, and hello to your wonderful human audience. Yeah, so we are Tracer Burnout. We are both retired Army guys, and we sit down with other veterans, regardless of service, regardless of how long they were in the service, and we let them tell their story. Uh, Typically, we start off by asking, do you have a family history of service? Because you find that a lot of soldiers, sailors, airmen, all sorts of service members tend to have a military background. Maybe not their parents directly, but a cousin, a grandfather, what have you. And then what led them to join the service that they joined, and then we kind of walk through their career with them, and they tell us all about their journey, whether it was 4 years in the Coast Guard or 20 years in the Marines or whatever.
So what is kind of your story? Like, if you could give us just a little snippet of who you are as a person.
This is the
Well,
backstory, Dan. Yeah.
well, both Roger and I have kind of the same origin story because we both were Army brats. Our fathers were both career Army officers, and so we grew up all over the world. In fact, we both spent time in countries that don't exist anymore.
That's true. Yeah.
I was born in what was West Germany, and bounced around, wherever my dad went, the whole family went. So from West Germany to, Israel, Egypt, here in the US, and even such far-flung exotic places as Canada. Uh, I was a I was a decent student in school, but I knew before I even graduated high school that college was not for me, because if a subject doesn't interest me, then I'm not going to pay attention to it. So I joined the Army to have a job, get some experiences. Plus, it was what I already knew, the travel and everything. And I ended up making a 20-plus year career out of it.
Wow. Wow. And what branch of the military were you in?
I was in the Army.
Okay, I thought you had said that, but I might have missed it. So, I told you guys before we started, I know nothing about military life, but I do understand PTSD. So I do appreciate that you guys allow veterans to tell their stories. I think it's very
Yeah.
needed. Um, that's awesome. Like you did 20 years. Wow,
Yeah.
that's I can't even imagine. So, Mr. Roger,
Yes. So
you're
very,
up, sir.
yeah, very similar. So again, yeah, Dan said we moved all over the place. He and I lived in the same place at the same time, several instances. So we were
Wow.
kind of elementary school age together, kind of peeled away for a few years, and then reunited back for high school. This would have been in the Fayetteville, Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty area. And very very similar. I was a decent student. I loved sports. I loved doing stuff with my hands. I loved working with people. And about halfway through my junior year of high school, my parents were asking, hey, what do you want to do with your life? And again, another Army brat here. I hadn't ever really taken a long, hard look at what I wanted to do beyond high school, because I guess it was just kind of baked in that the Army was what I wanted to do. I did end up getting snookered into going to college, which took me in the ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps route. So I took a little bit of a different path than Dan did, but I've just this last week wrapped up a 20+ year career as well. So we're back in Fayetteville, back in the All-American city, and we're working on this podcast together. So we're excited.
That's amazing. So what made you guys start the podcast? Like I read your mission statement.
Yeah.
I'm really drawn to that because I appreciate that you give people that platform, which is what I try to do for, anybody. But
Yeah, sure.
veterans definitely need it. So what brought you two together to start that?
I think it's kind of an interesting story. I'll start and then I'll hand it off to Dan because it's like a tennis. So I was in Boston last summer in a clinical study studying a traumatic brain injury, TBIs. And so I was simultaneously doing a virtual fellowship with a really great organization called the Honor Foundation, which just kind of helps veterans prepare for retirement and their transition into the civilian life. And I was doing a virtual cohort, so I was able to do it from Boston. And I'm in my hotel room, sitting on the bed. I've done all my medical stuff for the day, and I'm wrapping up a couple phone calls with some really great people, and I'm kind of starting to get kind of the fuzzy outline of what I want to do next. And it really, at the time, it was, hey, I want to do something involved with veterans, and I want to do something that will, serve probably a nonprofit. So nonprofit. I don't, I can't really get my arms around this thing. And so I pick up my phone and I text Dan and say, hey, Dan, you want to start a veteran nonprofit with me? And Dan, what happens next?
I text you back immediately and said, call me.
Which I did. And then Dan, you can explain far better than me.
Yeah. So that evening was the first of many long conversations. But my immediate reaction to his text was, rather than a 501c3, let's do a podcast. And it had been something that I had been thinking about for years beforehand, before I even retired. That the vast majority of veterans go unnoticed. That's probably not a fair word, but when people think of military service, they think about guys kicking indoors and shooting people in the face, dropping bombs from 30,000 feet, doing all sorts of crazy cool, awesome stuff, blowing stuff up, whatever. But they don't know that there are hundreds of thousands of service members active at one time. And there are lawyers, and there are clerks, and there are cooks, and there are the people that fix the planes that drop the bombs, and there are guys that prep the equipment for those that kick indoors. There are guys that fix, repair, and stuff the parachutes for the guys that are jumping out of planes. But most people don't think about it like that, or most of the civilian population doesn't think about it like that. And so all those people and all of their stories of service go unnoticed, because the people that you see on the news or in the movies, or the guys that write books, they tend not to be those everyday normal soldiers. They tend to be these super awesome guys and gals. And so my pitch to Roger was, let's start a podcast. We're perfectly located. Well, at the time he wasn't. He was in Yorktown, but I was already retired and back in Fayetteville. And the Fayetteville area is just completely ripe with veterans of all sorts. And I was like, we will never lack for people to talk to here from a multitude of services. And let's just have them on and talk about their time in uniform. That's it. And so many hours of discussion that I sadly robbed his poor wife of spending time with him during those
You're
hours.
probably doing her a favor anyway, so it's fine.
Yeah, that's probably true. But we slowly whittled down our scope as to, how we wanted to go about it, what we were going to talk about, what sort of recurring themes should we have, but, also not make it about us, make it about the guest.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we think these stories are very, maybe it's a cheesy term, but it's very humanizing, to get to Dan's point about the wild and crazy movies and all this. It's oftentimes that really, and we experienced this growing up too. It's that really amazing person who lives down the street from you, who you may or may not have ever even talked to, or you just kind of wave while they're cutting the grass or whatever. I mean, I experienced this a few times, again, growing up in Fayetteville. It's, the old guy down the street that you always wave to. Did you know that he got a, Silver Star in Korea, and, he's been a widower and lived alone for the last 30 years and nobody ever really talks to him? There's a lot of that. And so we're trying to humanize the veteran experience because we think it's important to kind of help build or mend in my opinion, the divide between the civilian population and the military and the veteran population, which is, I think it's fair to say it's bigger now than it's ever been. A lot of that is because the military is smaller now than it's ever been. Just think back to the 20th century, when how many men we had under arms at any given time during World War I, II, and even the draft after Vietnam. How many veterans we had in the country, and then serving on Capitol Hill and serving in leadership roles all over the place. It's not really the case anymore. And so we think this is trying to fill that need.
I like that. I like the fact that you guys don't just want the guys who are on the front lines,
Yeah.
that you do look for the ones, because the way that I look at it is any man or woman who walks into a recruiting office or decides to go into the military, they're putting their lives on the line. It doesn't matter what they do, because at any given moment, couldn't one of them be on the front lines if needed? So it doesn't matter if they're a cook or they're behind the scenes or they're, preparing your parachutes. It's, I look at that as, the mentality of I want to serve my country. So
Yeah.
I really honor that, that you guys allow those people as well
Oh,
to
absolutely. I
tell
mean,
their
you gave up
stories.
the service member gave up years of their life. I mean,
Hmm.
there is no 90-day contract in the military. It's all multiple years, typically between 3 and 4 for an initial enlistment. And you gave up years of your life to put on the uniform and serve so that somebody else didn't have to. And I mean, yes, you probably had your own motivations to do it, whether it was for a job or to get out of a bad situation or to get money for college, whatever it was, but you still did it and you still served. And that service deserves to be recognized, and recognized in a way that is not just a, hey, happy Veterans Day. Thanks for your service.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
it's important for the service members to feel recognized in a more sincere way, but
Yeah.
also in a
I like
more
that.
lasting way.
Yeah.
Because through telling their story, that story is going to last. Their future generations will then be able to go back and hear grandpa or grandma talk about their time in uniform.
Right.
And they'll hear things that they never even knew about.
Yeah. I mean,
Right.
we're just a drop in the bucket in that, but it is our contribution.
Yes. I mean, I found out this past the D-Day anniversary. I was out to dinner with my parents, and I did not know this until we were talking about it at dinner. And my dad was like, "Oh yeah, your great uncle was on the invasion beaches." It's like, I didn't know that. I mean, he was deceased long before I was born, but that would have been cool to know. My
Hmm.
grandfather never talked about it, and that was his brother. I mean, so that story, his story of service, is lost, and I don't want anybody else to have to deal with that, because there's lots of stuff I'd love to talk to him about.
Right. You're leaving honorable memories for future generations to look back
Yeah.
on. And I think in this day and age of technology, it's easier for us to leave videos and
Yes.
audios, than it was back then. But I think there's a lot more recently, I guess. I've seen a lot more people want to do that, want to leave those memories. And I think this is an amazing way of doing it. I know
Yeah.
when I started my intentional healing journey 5 years ago, the first thing, when I was on that precipice of ending my life, I had some very good veteran friends who understood PTSD
Mhm.
and were, pulled me out of that darkness I was in. And the first thing I did was try to honor them and honor, the military veterans by creating the Beer Love and Bacon Project. And,
Still
I know
such an
we
amazing name.
um, and I'm not really sure. It was like one of those, I get 100 things in my head at a time. It was just one of those thoughts that came out. But I like beards and I like bacon, but I mean, when we were talking before we started, I noticed, a little bit more facial hair on Mr. Roger, and
It's
he
fresh.
just, yeah. And that's one thing I found was that when veterans, they complete their career, however many years it is, they grow facial hair, whether it's for a short period of time just to try it out, or, they grow long, beards to their knees. I don't know, but yeah, it's kind of fun to see the transition, I guess, from being into to being retired. But yeah, that's
Well, it
my
was
take
like,
on Mr. Rogers' beard.
Yeah.
well, like you said about the healing journey, a lot of veterans, from my experience, a lot of veterans don't set out for that intentionally. Um, Typically, it takes an event or a series of events uh, to get them to take that healing journey, and a lot of it has to do um, with their time in service
Mhm.
and feeling heard and feeling understood. And that's also part of why we're doing it, is because for whatever reason, with as many veterans as there are in the country right now, and even throughout the world, um, veterans typically don't feel heard. They don't feel like people really recognize or appreciate their service, sadly. So by sitting down and talking with us, it's just veterans talking to veterans. We don't have a crew of people. It's literally Roger and myself
Once
and
that
a
got light
guest.
turns on, that's it.
Yes, which has been the bane and boon of our
Yeah, we've
existence.
made mistakes.
But they can sit down and they can talk to us about whatever they want. We will ask some probing questions, but if they want to talk about how they struggled with survivor's guilt for 30 years after Vietnam, we'll sit there and we'll talk to them about that. And if they want to talk about happier memories that they have, that's absolutely fine too. Um,
Yeah.
the episode that comes out on Monday, we talked to an author who wrote a book about his unit's experience in Afghanistan, just one tour, and really it was about uh, their eight-month stint in one particular section of Afghanistan, and it was hell on earth. And him writing the book and him talking to these guys helped them reconnect with guys that they had lost contact with. They started an amazing organization for all those guys, Operation Resiliency. And by telling the stories and talking through their experiences with each other and some counselors as well, they've begun that healing. But I mean, it started with them talking to each other.
And that was going to be my question. Do you find that talking about it, you know, helps? When you guys sit down with them, does it help you to listen
It's
to,
it's, it's funny you brought that up because we we don't have that on our mission statement officially. It's the unofficial fifth one. We're doing this because we love doing it, but part of that is this is kind of a catharsis for us as well, because this is kind of helping us relate and kind of process some of our own mental and emotional you know distress that we've
Yeah,
accumulated over so many combat tours and other kinds of stuff that we've had to deal with. So yeah,
yeah,
in a way, this is kind of uh, our own
your
listening
healing
list.
journey too?
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I mean, obviously, as veterans, we know we weren't the only ones there because you always had a battle buddy to your left and right.
yeah,
But I mean, it still helps to talk to people.
And
yeah,
I
and
can relate to that because that's kind of why I started the podcast was I'm in my intentional healing journey, but me allowing other people to talk as well helps me go
Mhm.
through my process. So I can
But
imagine,
yeah, it's about having that shared experience that you have.
yeah,
Um, and I think that's one of the issues with mental health that a lot of veterans face is they don't want to talk to somebody who wasn't there and who has no experience with it, right?
how could
Um,
they
right,
understand, right?
how could they
right.
possibly understand, right? And Roger and I are in no way medical professionals. We are absolutely not. We're
That's our
just
disclaimer. Yes.
we are just veterans. But whether somebody served in Vietnam or in the global war on terror or in the first Gulf War, we served. So we understand service. We understand what it's like to wear the uniform and go to those places and do those things. So
Right.
it's a shared experience that helps start that conversation.
You don't have to be a medical professional or a therapist to be a good listener
Sure.
and to have those shared experiences. That's kind of what I found. I may not understand, the full gambit of military service, but I can listen. And that's kind of with Justin, who is my monthly now veteran who sits down with us and kind of is on his healing journey. He, that's I just sit and listen. Like the 30 to 40 minutes he talks is his time to be vulnerable. So I can definitely understand why you guys are doing this. And it's amazing. Like I love it. I love it.
Yeah, well,
That's commendable that he's willing to
yes,
discuss these things at all, but also in a public forum like this. I
yeah,
think Dan and we are trying to take this in a direction. We're trying to learn from God love our previous generations, but our greatest generation, and to a lesser extent the boomers, didn't talk about this stuff very
Mhm.
much. It doesn't necessarily have to be all the harrowing stuff, but just
Right.
the greatest generation's almost prideful about the fact that they didn't talk about any of their military service, and they had their reasons, I understand, but I think it did the public in the long term, it did the public a disservice. And that kind of carried on to the boomers. And so we're both baby Gen Xers or graybeard millennials, however you want to look at it. We're trying to learn from what I see as some of the mistakes from the previous generations by airing some of the stuff out. Now that said, I mean, we've had boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials on our show already. So we're trying to give everybody a fair hearing,
yeah,
and we're
yeah,
prioritizing the older folks just because let's face it, they have less time.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I like that because it's uh, I think when I was just starting and going through my dark moments, having those people there just to listen when you thought no one was there for you. I mean, I can understand where they're coming from. And to your point about, not talking about it, I noticed that it is true, like with some of the older veterans I talked to, um, they were told, you don't show your emotions, you don't cry,
yeah,
you just suck it up and you go on. This was your duty. Now you just have to live the rest of your life. And I found that very saddening because you can be a man, you can have masculinity and still have emotion and still cry and still be able to express yourself.
Yeah.
So hopefully, you're opening up a new I don't know, like a new era of veterans who can express themselves. Because I think, like, for me, when I had PTSD, which I didn't know I had, when I started being able to talk about it is when I was able to start healing. Um, so I really do hope that um, this is very cathartic and very, um, it helps them mentally, physically, however it is, and I think it will. How many episodes are you guys in now?
Episode 9 comes out on
Wonderful.
Monday. We tend to record several episodes ahead. A large part of that had to do with us not being co-located at the time.
Mhm.
But then we've also booked, several other guests well into the future, months and months ahead. So
How many do you do a month? How many do you post a month?
two. Originally, we
Yeah.
started
It's just
at a 3 week release, so 3 weeks in between episodes. But again, that had to do with Roger not being co-located, so we weren't able to, get together and sit down uh, as frequently. But now that he is co-located, we are pumping up the volume.
yeah.
It's all on you, Mr. Roger.
Yeah. No pressure at all.
Well, is there anything else you guys would like to talk about before we close out this episode? I'm sure we're going to have you on future episodes. I can already feel it, but um, we
We'd love
definitely,
to be your mascots. Yes.
yes, yes. I love mascots. Don't get me started. You got to keep the beards though. You
Oh,
can't
that's
shave
not going anywhere.
Roger.
Before I even retired, I knew that I would never be clean shaven again.
I'm in my 40s, and look how white that is. That I have three
Yeah,
daughters, so
I am older than Roger, and look at this.
No
yes,
gray.
it's just for men looks fantastic, Dan. That's great. Yeah.
Never once
Is that
started.
what it is, huh?
That is absolutely not what it is.
Your secret is
Roger
safe
had
with
it right.
us.
Roger started off his family with three wonderful little girls who have turned his beard Snow White.
Snow White. It's just going to get whiter too.
I know, man. It can't get any whiter at this point, and I can't get any balder. So I guess the good news is that, it's all uphill from here. So
There you go. There you go. Well, I really appreciate your guys' heart,
yes, ma'am.
for the veterans, and definitely going to be watching your episodes, keeping track of you, mentioning you on the show, because I think everyone needs to know that you're out there. And I hope that I can just be a little bit of a jumping off point, to be able to get you guys out there and people heard. So, definitely have to join my Beer Love and Bacon group so I can say, hey, Mr. Roger,
Absolutely.
Mr. Dan are here now. So
I don't want to
um,
be excommunicated if I have to shave my beard. So we'll see how it goes.
you will
You
be. You
will
will
be.
cut off. No.
Okay.
That's
All
right. That's right, TJ.
Once
You tell
again, no
him.
pressure, right? So we're on all the podcast platforms, at least the major ones and
Wonderful.
most of the minor ones. And we're also on YouTube and Rumble. So if you like it on the audio format or the video format, we got it covered.
Wonderful. Are you and you're on Spotify,
We
Apple,
are
all the
indeed.
major ones.
Spotify, Apple, iHeart, Audible, Amazon, a bunch of other ones that I
There's some
didn't
smaller
even know
ones.
existed.
Yep. And
Well,
every
yeah,
other
I know
Monday.
there's so many of them out there. There's so many. But I'm so excited for you guys, and I can't wait to see where you are in like 6 months from now. But we'll definitely have to catch up with each other again and just, you
We'd love
know,
it.
yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today and introducing yourselves to my audience. I appreciate you both.
Yes,
And
ma'am. Thank
thank
you.
you so
Thank you for
much
having
for,
us. Yeah.
yes, yes. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Soul Hygiene. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.